in my defence, he was the player getting hooked at half-time against Rangers. He was the player getting hooked at half-time twice out of 3 games.
He has already, by this point, between August and November, already had one of the best individual seasons from any winger that we've had in the last 10 years.
We seem to bring a lot of bodies in Brendan's first year, and almost none of them worked out.
No big club is out there bringing in 4 players in the last 2 days of the window. No big club is doing their business that way.
Title party week this week at Celtic Park. There's still lots to talk about. That's this week on 20 Minute Tims. I'm your host Jamie. I'm joined by Melly.
Yes.
And Stephen.
Championis, folks.
Absolutely. Critically, you have to pronounce it like that.
Yes.
Celtic did a good job against Hibs. Brendan Rodgers pointed out that it could have been, we are championis. I think that's how he said it.
Yep.
He said we could have just turned up. It could have been easy against a difficult team, but Celtic played some good football. I agree with him. It was a thoroughly entertaining 90 minutes of association football.
That's exactly what it was. I feel like there's always something extra entertaining about Hibs versus Celtic, Celtic versus Hibs. It's a fixture I tend to look forward to, regardless of whether it's close or whether Celtic dominate, or sometimes Hibs get the better. That was the curse, Easter Road curse for a long time for Brendan Rodgers. So that the fixture, whichever way around it is, tends to hold a bit of spice to it. It's always quite an entertaining game. Hibs always brings something to the party, and it was no different at the weekend. I thought it was a thoroughly entertaining game.
Hibs have always got this reputation, Melly, of being like a football playing side. It's like within their brand, even though that was probably, everyone spoke about Tony Mowbray's Hibs team, how they were the best footballing side in the league, they were called at the time. And they've but that's always in my mind when we play Hibs. We're going to be a right good game today because Hibs like to play football. And do you know what? But a lot of the time, they don't. I mean, they did play a wee bit at Celtic Park, admittedly, this weekend.
Even when they've had poor iterations of the Hibs team, they've always tried to play football, sometimes really badly, but they always seem to go for it. And I do like the away kit they've got this year with the purple and the green, just sort of bringing back that old one. They came and they tried to play their game. They tried it recently when they came in the Scottish Cup, didn't they? They came away with 3-1 this weekend and 3-0. So they've come up against Celtic and they've come up short. But you don't ever feel shortchanged by these games because there's 2 teams that are going at it. They're not just going to sit there, despite sometimes playing a back 5 and just plank a back 5 along and then go at that. They always try to have different ways of playing, and they're a bit not direct, but they try and make things happen rather than a lot of teams. You're just waiting. They're not going to get into our half. Sometimes Celtic don't need to really press teams into mistakes, but they were good against Hibs, and Hibs get the goal against the run of play, and it just sort of odds Celtic on a bit.
There's been a lot going on this week, Stephen, because there's no sense that Celtic are winding things down. We had that lull a couple of weeks ago, but that seems to have been completely gone. Both in Brendan's pre-match and post-match press conferences, he said a lot of things that we are going to dig into. There's the 30th anniversary of Dermot Desmond taking over Celtic, which there's been columns written about the success or perceived success of that. Brendan even spoke about stuff that he wants to do in the transfer window, so that we're really no winding down. And then there is the subject of a midweek game that we're going to see. Brendan says he's going to revolve the lineup, and then we've got the title part.
Revolve, I like that.
Then we've got the title party at the end of the week. There is a sort of unofficial title party taking place in the TRONGATE after that. I saw that the North Curve Celtic, the Green Brigade official Twitter account, tweeted out about that. I've got mixed feelings on the TRONGATE thing. I've got to say, the first time it happened was that under Ange, Melly. Remind me, 3 years ago, was it? Must have been. It happened under Ange. It was brilliant. It was some spectacle, and it felt sort of spontaneous and exciting. I was like, this is what it should be like. This is absolutely brilliant. This is the way it should go on. But I felt in subsequent years, it's just trying to recapture the magic of the first time around. And it's never really been. It's honestly, for me, it's never been quite as good as that first time. And in fact, I'd go as far as to say I think every subsequent year it's kind of got worse and worse and worse. And I think it's worthwhile doing, but I think we're at the time now where the club and the council need to step in and actually organise something for us, because there's a market there for it. We like it. We want to do it.
Happens every year.
And but for me, it's never been as good as that first year. And I want to see more participation and actually making something happen, making it a fan zone, doing something good for us.
It's kind of Groundhog Day stuff, isn't it? I feel like we get to this point every year and we start talking about how we could organise this better, how the city could do better by this, how the club could maybe liaise with the city and trying to get something organised with maybe like a fan zone, like an official thing that's put on for people with toilets and bars and bins, God forbid, right? But it never, for whatever reason, it never seems to happen. And here we are having the same conversations about it. I get kind of bored of the general discourse about it, because here's what's going to happen. It's going to happen. 70% of it is going to be absolutely fine. It's going to be well-meaning, people having a good time. 30% of it, after a certain time, is going to get a little bit tetchy. A couple of fights are going to break out, which is proportionally going to be insignificant, but it's the one thing it's going to be focused on. And then there'll be the pictures and the videos of people walking about with their phones the next day, pointing to 6 broken bottles in the street, saying this is an absolute disgrace. So
I like the backlash to that, where somebody shows, oh look, here it is 2 hours later and it's all clean.
Yes. So again, we're now into this cycle of talking about the whole
buckle up for
thing.
that boring ass sort of, as you say, people running about. Oh look, this is a disgrace. I'm walking my dog here and there's plastic bottles everywhere. You're like, but that's
people who have driven in and specifically to do this.
I drove all the way from Giffnock to look at this pile of broken bottles in the street. The problem is, Melly, this is, I think, a consequence of nothing being put on for fans, because I think I have heard that the community councils of the TRONGATE and maybe the Carlton met with Glasgow City Council and Celtic. There's been discussions about trying to have some sort of fan zone at either the Emirates or either at Celtic Park, and no agreement could ever be reached. But I think, as Stephen points out, all the trouble, or any of the trouble that happens at this event or whenever it happens, is proportionally so small. You know, it's like on the levels of what you would get at T in the Park or Transmart, whatever, given how many people are there. And then the mess, I think, is just a consequence of the fact that the council don't even put so much as an extra wheelie bin. Kelvingrove Park's the same. On a sunny day, everyone goes to Kelvingrove Park. You get the photos of, look at the mess, and it's like, we've nowhere to put it. There's nowhere because nothing extra's put on. So that's kind of how I feel about it. I think it's just, I'm repeating myself definitely, but it is long by time. It's good to see it as a spectacle, but I think it's long by time something proper was arranged.
Yeah, it was good. Remember when we were doing the trebles and you had the bus going through, and then there was one season that couldn't be done because it was just so busy, and it kind of all felt organic, didn't it? But now it's starting to feel like it's just this thing that we maybe do, and it's just expected.
A set piece.
Yeah. But if people go there and enjoy it, fair play to them. But it's just getting to that point, like, right, surely we're at the stage now where this is going to happen every year, and look, God forbid if Celtic don't win the league, the other team will do something as well. So can we not try?
They all go to George Square and batter lumps at each other. That's what they do. Blow their own hands off with fireworks.
Freedom Square. Oh, glory days, that were it. But there has to be, surely, that we can get together and go, right, this is what's going to happen. Can we try and do something for the good of it? Even if it is just extra wheelie bins for
Portaloos and wheelie bins, anything. That's all we ask for.
I went along a couple of times just to say that I've seen it, really, but it's not really for me anymore. I'll probably just be celebrating. There's a general tone of that. A lot of people saying, like, I've kind of done it now, I'm going to celebrate my own way. Probably me and the pals will go find a pub somewhere rather than be in the street, because I think there is you can't really take the temperature online because it's not the real world.
It's going to be
anymore.
roasted, mate.
Oh, it is, yeah. It's going to be an absolute scorcher as well. Stay safe out there, folks. But
Pack the Factor 50, is that what you're saying?
Definitely. But when that announcement was made, you look at the quote tweets and it's a lot of people saying, oh, really, we're still going ahead with this? Is it still going? But you can't, again, we're talking about tens of thousands of people. You can't really just gauge everything by a handful of tweets about it. So it's not something I tend to do. So I don't like to pontificate on it. Again, as Melly said, people are going to do what they want to do. I'm not going to sit here and try and stop them or anything like that.
For the record, we're not sitting here saying to people do or don't
go. No.
We're just passing our opinion on
that.
Yeah,
no, certainly not. And by all means, just batter in. It's not really for me. I've been a couple of times now, and that'll probably do me. I'll celebrate in my own way. Nothing weird. Just.
Well, sounds a bit weird.
Tell the truth. Are you going home to watch Eurovision?
Yes. You're happy now.
Mark Melly, the game at the weekend, let's talk about that. There's a few things I want to pick up from. First of all, Brendan came out after the game and he defended a few of his players, namely Maeda and Arne Engels. He thought they would probably been due for some undue criticism. He came out and defended Austin Trusty. He said that he's been playing on the wrong side, and I thought, well, if you mean the right side, a centre-half, which he was playing in that game with Scales, I thought you're right. Says, but that's just today. Usually plays on the left side, so the criticism he's been getting hasn't really been for that. We were critical of those two players at the last flagship podcast of Maeda and Arne Engels. We weren't critical, but we were realistic, I think, to be fair to us, about them. Do you think they wanted some defending from Brendan?
He's always going to defend his players, isn't
Mm.
he says them week in, week out, and it's two players that he has spoken about recently with this coming from a different league and having to play so many matches and the demands on players, and we sort of forget about it because we're in it, but we have to look at it like when Maeda was talking about it recently as well, like, and you hear these guys, and like, players don't come to many clubs and just start winning trophies, do they? But they do it at Celtic, and then when they don't win trophies, it's a disaster. And so it's a rare thing. Stephen, you talk about it, and we talk about it when we bring in new managers. Like, they need to know the league. No, probably not. But I think there is something in that when you get to Celtic, there is a different pressure that people feel. And going from Augsburg to Celtic is going to be a massive change in the amount of high pressure games you'll play in. So Ingles, I'm not so sure if he needs defended from his manager. He is a young player, but he's a fairly established player now. He plays most weeks. Maeda, there's probably a bit of defending him there. We can look at it and go, you know what, that's 19 goals from not many starts. But again, like I said last week, why are you not starting those games? Because it's not as if you've been out injured or we've had two other good strikers. But he does chipped in with another goal. But if he bagged all the chances he probably should, could have had a hat-trick easily. A couple of the chances he was flagged for offside, but even then he still missed them. Yeah. So put them away and then we'll deal with it later. But I said to Stephen, what did you think of Adam Enigma at the weekend? And that's kind of what he's becoming. The more I see of him, the less I know of what he's given us. And that's so different from this time last season when it was, we need to sign this guy, looks brilliant, it's a no-brainer. It's starting to get a bit difficult for him, but I still think there's a good player in there. And a lot of the time we say, he just needs a run of games. But for the remaining games of the season, I'd just play him and see what we can get and build up to it and then go again in pre-season.
So how many games has left? He's got 2 games in the league left, hasn't he?
Yeah.
And he probably will play, actually, because I don't know who else will play.
The absence of Jota kind of forces the hand a little bit there. There are options. What we previously had when Jota was fully fit and firing, or we're getting towards fully fit and firing, we had 4 really good options for 3 positions. With Jota not there, it kind of forces the hand and kind of have to play Ida. I know that when I say have to play Ida, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But Ida, we've spoken about him a lot recently, and the fact is he keeps scoring. He keeps playing and he keeps scoring. We can make a big deal about the fact that he's missing chances all we like, but strikers miss chances. That's an absolute fact. It doesn't matter how good you are. Erling Haaland, Kyogo, if you wanted to directly compare him to him, missed loads of chances as well, but he scored loads of goals. The probably better comparison for me is that we've had sort of sub-strikers or backup strikers at the time, but he scored more goals than Giakoumakis ever did in any given season. So
still a lot of love for Giakoumakis.
Yeah, everybody raves about him, and for good reason. He was a popular guy, but he's had, I think his best season was 13 in the league, and that was with the same sort of limited game time. I haven't compared it like for like, but
never scored against the Bears either.
Never scored against Rangers. Had a patchy record in Europe as well, I think. So I mean, I don't. My point here is not forget Giakoumakis. He does far better than him. It's just that it's interesting that the difference in perception of the 2 players is completely different. Like, one is the guy, we could do with a guy like that. We really need a Giakoumakis in this squad so we can have a plan B. Meanwhile, he does sort of going about his business fairly competently. So
he came out and he defended his goals per minutes ratio. He says, if you look at the minutes, if you look at the other stuff I'm doing, I just thought it was quite interesting that Brendan sort of picked up on the sort of criticism that the players are getting.
Right. We've done Ida, we've done Engels here, right?
There's moving on. Swiftly.
One guy missing up front, and that's old Lionheart Nicholas KUHN. Come on,
what? Well.
Bagged a goal, set up Ida.
Are you saying that? And he was involved in a fight as well.
Yeah, aye, fisticuffs and everything.
I know.
Handbags at dawn.
And he turned up with a black eye. So I suppose what you're saying is you've said the guy got heart of a mouse and he bursts back onto the scene.
Well, rumours are that he's went into camp boxing training and that's where he picked that up, sparring.
In his garage, kicking his height,
he's
shadow
got
boxing.
A picture of you on his punch bag and he just goes in there at night and that's what sets him free.
Listen, all I'm going to say is probably what spurred them on.
Oh yeah,
all that abuse. No, look,
coincidence? No, not for me.
He was absent for the Rangers game, and I said, "Let's see if he's back fit for the next one." and he was back fit. And Brendan, and then he comes out and he had a black eye, and people were giving it to me. They're going, see, he's got a black eye. You said his injury was fake. And then I watched the press conference from Brendan Rodgers the week before, and Brendan said he had a sore knee. Nothing to do with his eye.
He also said he was going to be fine.
He also said,
he said in that same press conference.
Whose side are you on? Nicholas KUHN is saying as he watches this. He was good in the game, and I was glad to see some of that battling energy. And I think, look, time will tell with Nicholas KUHN. I think he's had a good season, and I think having a hot hand at the beginning of the season, I'm kind of prepared to reserve judgment ever so slightly until next season, because he can't be here for 2.5 full seasons and just have one good 6 months. Because what's going to happen is he's going to turn into one of these players who everyone says, remember that brilliant 6 months Nicholas KUHN had?
Yeah.
He's going to be one of those players, and we were absolutely... It's not that we've always hated him. We were raving about him.
Yeah.
He just seems to have fallen off a wee bit. But if I was being fair and charitable, he fell off alongside a lot of the Celtic team. Admittedly, a lot of guys fell off a wee bit, and I just thought... I was more disappointed in Nicholas's fall off.
Not angry, just disappointed.
Not angry, just disappointed in his fall off a wee bit. But look, he's finishing the season, or he seems to be finishing the season quite strong. I mean, in my defence, he was the player getting hooked at half-time against Rangers. He was the player getting hooked at half-time twice out of 3 games. It's not just me that felt like his performances had dropped a wee bit. They were obvious, and the manager thought it as well.
I think that's fair. I think it's fair to point to those couple of games where he's getting hooked at half-time, because that's quite rare for a Celtic attacker to get hooked. In fact, do you know what? Brendan Rodgers isn't typically the type of manager who makes half-time changes. No. Even when people...
The old 60 minutes, do the whistle.
Even when people are crying out for it, like even when Celtic haven't played very well in the first half, you get the kind of general vibe from either the crowd, or if we were on the Discord following like an away game or whatever, it's always kind of changes definitely made at half-time, and he very rarely does it. So it speaks volumes that twice, on 2 occasions, he brought KUHN off at half-time. But in terms of him falling off this season, the thing is, with his first part of the season, I think he, as a player, was always the most likely to spectacularly fall off because of the heights he had hit in the early.
To be fair, there was no way. Like, you're right. I think you're right to point that out to me, because it's unfair for me to say you did it first half of the season. Why don't you do it for an entire season? Because that would have been a galactic season if you just copied and pasted the first half of the season onto the second half of the season. That would be like Henrik Larsson territory. That would be unbelievable sort of return for a £4 million winger from Vienna.
I remember we had a chat.
It was Vienna, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yes. So I remember we had a chat in about November, I think it was, where we were joking about the fact that if KUHN were to get injured tomorrow and not play a single other game, he has already, by this point, between August and November, already had one of the best individual seasons from any winger that we've had in the last 10 years, probably. At that point, he had double figures in goals and assists. Yep. So if he doesn't play a single other minute from November to May, he's already had a brilliant season. So it was always going to fall off. Whether there's room for the debate in there as to whether he should be falling off to such an extent that he's getting taken off at half-time, that's maybe debatable there, but he was always going to have a little bit of a dip in there. I think for any winger, I think it would be impossible to keep up those standards all season.
Yeah, you just have to look at the other side and see Daizen Maeda, maybe a slowish start to the season, then he burst onto the scene, and just now it's sort of tapered off over the last couple of weeks, hasn't it? We were talking a few weeks ago about can he get 40 goals, and I think he's got 1 since then. There's very little chance it's going to happen. So it's just the way of wingers.
We've spurred KUHN on and we've killed Maeda. We'll chat on this podcast.
We need to shut up. It's actually what a lot of people say to us in the comments. Shut up, stop podcasting. We get that fairly regularly. I think we've got 1 week to go before the end of the season, and it's at that point you kind of sit down, look at the squad as a whole, look at everyone's numbers, but there's no drive. Celtic going to win this treble. Absolutely everyone has contributed. It's I think people get awfully sensitive about criticism sometimes, which is odd because everyone has, even, I'm not saying everyone on the podcast, but I mean everyone that you go to the football with has the one player that they criticise. You could be watching Celtic like any week, and every single one of those players is someone's whipping boy. It just so happens to be the case that, you know, if you hear a guy on a podcast criticising the player that you happen to like, then I'm wrong, and that's just the way it works. That's the way of the world.
Speaking of the way of the world, again, I'm not responding to like comments that we directly get. I'm just talking about the general sort of discourse about football these days. I find it a shame that no one can tell the difference. Not no one, but people can't tell the difference between moaning and discussing.
Yeah.
What we are basically presenting here is pub chat. It's no different to any group of pals talking about the football here and there. It's just, for some reason, people find this entertaining enough to listen and watch it, right? But there's a big difference between discussing Arne Engels and hating him / moaning about him. Look, we're just talking about the football at the end of the day, and that this is part of it.
So we're going to see the numbers at the end of the season to see how far down my list of my favourite players Nicholas KUHN is. Below Greg Taylor for absolute certain. You can bank on it. A couple of years ago, there was speaking of judging players and numbers, it must have been about 10. When did Jan Vennegoor play for Celtic?
2006 to 8, maybe. 7 to 9.
Near 20 years.
Famously, historic media pundit Hugh Keevins came out and said that if you can't score 20 goals a season and no be a Celtic striker must score 20 goals a season, basically insinuating that you're a flop, you don't belong in the hoops. So Adam Maeda has got one more goal to score before he has to hit a Keevins.
Hit a Keevins. Just on that, I'll never pass up an opportunity to bring this up, but we had Big Jan on the podcast many years ago now, 6 or 7 years ago probably, and it was me who hosted it, and I got to ask Jan about Hugh Keevins, having said that about him. I was asking him about the goal he scored at Tannadice that clinched the title, and I also told him that was his 20th of the season, and it shut Hugh Keevins up. So it was a personal favourite of mine because he got to sort of ram it down Hugh Keevins' throat, and he was like, all right, you're still going then? How's you going?
Sure is. By the way, that's quite it's quite interesting you mentioned that, because it would be funny, wouldn't it, if Adam Maeda went on and scored his 20th. The last goal of the season was scored by Adam Maeda, and that was his 20th goal of the season, and got himself the Keevins for it. But Brendan Rodgers has obviously got one eye end of the season as well, Melly, because he was saying also in his post-match press conferences, he's done it again. I don't know why he does this, but he puts numbers on things. And he specifically said, at the end of last season, I'm not going to put a number on it, right? After putting a number on how many signings he wants. This time around, he said he wants, this is brilliant, this is Brendan brilliance. If everyone stays, I need 3 in. That is, Brendan loves saying things like that. And see if it doesn't happen. Bet your bottom dollar he's going to say, well, I don't like to put numbers on it. So my first issue is, if everyone stays, we've got players to discuss about who's staying and who's going at the end of the season. Some obvious, some not so obvious. Some players are reaching that sweet spot in their contract, like Rio Itati, where we usually sell them. Some players we know are out the door. So he's saying if everyone stays and he 3's in, he knows Greg Taylor's going out the door, more or less. So what are we going to do with the left-back position? So forget all that. It's not going to stay the same. People will definitely leave. But he's obviously identified nearly 3 positions in the squad that he thinks he needs filled. But what do you think they are?
Well, it's a tough one, isn't it? After the weekend, I might have changed my mind on 1 or 2 positions. We get Kieran Tierney coming in for left back, so that's taken care of, and you'd like to think bring in some sort of backup or competition there. We'll need to, but for me, the 3 positions, he's probably looking at 3 guys that can come in and play, and it has to be a striker. I think recently at a Q&A, he said when they asked about this, he said a winger, a direct winger who scores goals.
That was before Jota got injured, wasn't it?
Yeah, that would you'd be thinking there. So does that mean he doesn't want to sign a striker and Daizen's going to go? I don't think so. I think he'll want a striker. So a striker, a winger, and for me, it's a toss-up between central midfielder and a centre-half. There wasn't too keen on Scales or Trusty at the weekend. I thought they both looked a bit dodgy, and going long term, is that what I want? Willing to give Trusty maybe a stay execution in there, but even still, it's the bread and butter games he's struggled in rather than the big games. But
is he an underrated flop? Is Trusty a bit of an underrated? Because it was a lot of money we paid for him. £6 million, Cameron Carter-Vickers money, and you're sitting there at the end of the first season going, not too sure on the guy. Another one we've seen hooked at half-time.
Cameron Carter-Vickers, £6 million, yes, but it was 4 years ago. And what is £6 million? It probably is an Austin Trusty these days, but we find players like that a lot of money. For me,
particular circumstances though, that with Cameron Carter-Vickers as well, wasn't it? He had been on several loans, and nobody really made it permanent. Celtic took him on loan, and by that point, what was he, 24 3-4 at that point, and
always
Spurs
easier to do the deals when they're on loan as well.
Yeah, and I think at that point,
yeah.
At that point, Spurs are probably thinking, we've had this guy out on loan for ages. Our club finally wants him. Let's just kind of get the business done. So we may have well got, probably a guy who's worth significantly more than 6 million for 6 million, and we're thinking, well, that's quite a lot of money, but what a deal it was. So I'm not looking at it thinking, well, Trusty and Cameron Carter-Vickers are about the same level because of the price tag.
So I'm talking shit, basically. That's
yeah.
Thanks very much.
The comments were right.
Well, I think we've maybe paid a little bit of the whole. A lot of people like to talk about how there's no value to be found in England. Sometimes I think we may have paid that tax.
Yeah, good point.
You can't apply it across the board because Matt O'Reilly was 1.5 million.
It's a left-sided centre half.
We have been saying for a long time that transfer fees are an illusion.
Yeah, that's it. So they can't really be applied like for like, and you can't apply it across the board because, as I say, Matt O'Reilly was an absolute steal, a fraction of the cost of Austin Trusty, but we've probably just been, our hands kind of been forced with that.
Contract situations as well, isn't it? But I think the main position for me anyway would be midfield, probably a number 6, and then do we move Callum McGregor forward? But after seeing Real Hatate's masterclass at the weekend, I kind of thought it was the end of the road for him at the end of the season. But if he can put in performances like that, continue, you'd love to watch him here. So maybe a number 6 at defensive midfielder. The mini Rodri that everybody is in the whole world is looking for. Just go and find
me a Rodri for £6 million.
It's even 6 million's too much for us, isn't it? So a midfielder, a winger, and a striker would be my three.
I can't really disagree with any of those, to be honest. I think striker will be a must because when you think about it, when Brendan Rodgers was talking in January about really wanting a striker, not much has actually changed since then. I know that there seems to be a bit of a Mandela effect that everyone thinks Daizen is like the number 1 striker now, but I don't think he's played all that much through the middle. It has here and there, but despite the fact that he's continued to score goals all the time up until we cussed it by talking about him getting to 40 goals, he's still been playing largely on the left and scoring goals from there. So I don't think Daizen now playing through the middle has changed the objectives there because Brendan Rodgers acknowledged that at the time as well. He said, yeah, I know Daizen can play through the middle. It's just I still want another striker. So I think that's an absolute must. Winger seems to be a definite because of aforementioned chat that came out of a Q&A thing. I think there is a centre half I think will need to be addressed because we seem to be getting untidy in that position again, in that I'd really love a go-to, not necessarily having to play every single week throughout the entire season, but right now it makes me just personally as a fan slightly uneasy that we don't have a go-to absolute cast iron partnership there that you can rely on. We don't have a Carter-Vickers and Starfelt. We don't have an Ayer and Julian. We don't have a...
Have you been unfair to Liam Scales there?
Maybe, but I think Liam Scales has come in. I'm perfectly happy with Liam Scales playing on occasion. That's not really my point. It's just that Liam Scales seems to have come in at the expense of the guy who was, to all intents and purposes, supposed to replace Liam Scales. So what I mean is that it's gotten slightly untidy in that I think you made the point quite recently, Jamie, about how we've seemed to have spent about 15 million quid trying to replace Liam Scales, and yet he is the guy who's still in there on merit. That says a lot for him and his sort of fortitude in there, his testicular fortitude, that good old wrestling phrase in there. So it says a lot for him that he is seeing off this competition, but it doesn't say an awful lot for the recruitment that we're getting, again, quite wrong in these positions. So I don't have a huge problem with any of the individuals involved. It's not that I dislike Trusty or Scales or any of the others. It's just I want, if I was to have my choice, I would want serious investment been made in a proper partner for Cameron Carter-Vickers, really. I
think we're coming into a really unusual summer for Celtic, to be honest. I think just when you referenced what Brendan said in January, and that's the reason why I said this stuff about putting numbers on players, it just always backfires. It just always backfires because he's always going to be held to that, partly probably our fault. I mean, we're sitting here knowing that, and then if it doesn't happen, we'll be the first people to say, we wanted 3 back. So,
and that's a minimum as well. Again, we've already addressed it, but that's assuming everyone stays, and there's absolutely no chance that everyone stays. So what you're really dealing with is a minimum of 3 before anyone goes out the door. If we lose 3 or 4, that's 7, 8, 9 signings we could be potentially expecting to make.
It's such a weird summer insofar as, is it going to be Brendan's last season? That's always going to be there, and how will that influence the transfers? Brendan says he wants 3 players in, and I think that's as a minimum, probably fair enough. And I think centre half, winger, striker, maybe a central midfielder, left back. He's got Kieran Tierney coming in. So I think those positions are fair enough as well. Who's going to go out? That's another huge question. Because if one of those players is Rio Atati, you're like, right, well, he's a player we really need to replace. How do you replace that type of player? Plus add another one. So you start to build upon replacements, upon players coming in and improvements. And there's another question over, you know, it seems like this is kind of still Ange's team. These players that we've got were identified under Ange, either re-signed or signed first time under Ange, and Brendan's been working with that. We seem to bring a lot of bodies in Brendan's first year, and almost none of them worked out. They've all kind of went out. Then follow-up players like Palmer haven't worked out, and there's been more misses than hits as far as Brendan's first couple of years as signings go, so we really can't afford that to happen again in the summer. And you're left thinking, will this ever be Brendan's team, or if Brendan does go next season as is expected, or the end of next season, is this manager going to come in and still have basically Ange's team? Is he going to have a 5 or 6 year old Celtic team to work with? At which point you would expect other players to who would want to go, or their time's just up. So I think we're actually coming into a really crucial summer for Celtic, and I think it's one that the signings have to be absolutely bang on. Now, we had our recruitment problems with Mark Lowell. He shown the door for whatever reason or left. We've replaced him with a new guy. We've not really heard much from the new guy, but all we know is in January we had our recruitment problems again, trying to replace key players in key areas, and that big whole thing.
Kyogo.
Yep. Oh, bang. Absolutely sensational. Just going to let that linger for a minute. Let the viewers and listeners enjoy it. So we try to...
Wee bit longer. Go on. Right, that'll do it.
There we go. Brilliant. We try to replace Kyogo, as you say. So we're coming into a really critical summer just for Celtic, and I think Brendan Rodgers putting a bit of a marker down early, saying, look, summer I want this, 3 players, it's good. Whether we're going to see some sort of revolution and who goes is a complete other story, and whether or not that happens and we get it right is the big question. And I think when I was reading today, I think Stephen McGowan wrote a piece for the Herald sort of reviewing Brendan Rodgers, Dermot Desmond's 30 years in charge of Celtic after he took over from Fergus McCann, and all the success that we've really had since then, and the way that the club's been run, and the fact that he sort of is a bit of an absentee landlord. When things go wrong, you don't really hear from him, and he lets Peter Law run the club, and then Michael Nicholson subsequently after that, and Brendan Rodgers. But this stuff with the Rangers takeover and the Hearts takeover is sort of made my interests peak a wee bit, because I don't know if we can necessarily afford to mess this summer up. No. You know, this could be in the Dermot Desmond's 30 years, a lot of that time Rangers were strong, but then they became an absolute basket case. And they have been a basket case for an awful long time now. And you would expect that to end in the summer, Melly. And you just need to assume that Rangers are going to sort of get their act together sooner or later. We all have on record saying we want Rangers takeover to go well. You want the Hearts takeover to go well. We want the opposition in the league to be strong in the hope that it lifts Celtic and pushes Celtic. But do you think this is a renewed focus for the Celtic board going into this summer about what might be happening at Rangers and maybe lesser so Hearts?
I think it has to be, doesn't it? We all want Celtic to be successful, but as we've seen this season, when it's just a sort of procession to the league, it's maybe not as exciting. It's still great when you win it and you get the trophy, but you kind of hope that Celtic have got an eye on this and going, right, we need to get this right, because we spent a lot of money last season, but the players that have come in haven't hit the ground running at all, have they? And again, with this summer coming, get Champions League qualifiers and a chance we might be unseeded. And again, like we spoke about it towards the end of the window, no big club is out there bringing in 4 players in the last 2 days of the window. No big club is doing their business that way. So Celtic, again, need to change it. We can't have manager after manager coming in and talking about problems with recruitment, can we? And players, positions changing within that, guys coming, guys going, and still the same problems being there. So Celtic have to be a bit more forward thinking in this. The manager obviously has targets or positions he wants to target. Don't see why we can't go and get them. Again, we've got money in the bank. We're going to be looking at it as very unlikely we're not going to lose at least one big player this summer. So again, we should be preparing for this. Whether we are or not, I don't know. But I think the renewed sort of competition hopefully is a good thing to push Celtic on. Hearts, after the sort of announcement of who they're going for their new manager, not so worried about them. But with Rangers,
It's Derek McInnes. If
yes,
you don't know.
yes,
Melly just needless to leave it
yeah.
a cliffhanger there.
they've scouted the world with all these analytics, and they've come up with Derek McInnes.
Well, let's just pause on that because we were talking about that before, Stephen. Right, we know what Rangers are going to do. They've got Barry Ferguson there who's champing at the bit for the job. He says he can take on any challenge.
Won at Ibrox at the weekend there, by the way.
Yep.
Not bad.
Get
Not
him
bad.
signed up.
Yep.
We still haven't beaten him though, but I mean, he's not done remarkable. He's not done well at all as interim manager. So any talk of him getting the job is fanciful, I think. Although I'm all for it if they want to do it. But the Hearts one's peculiar, isn't it? Because they've prioritised a manager apparently with local knowledge. With that knowledge of the league. And that's got that exact reaction from a lot of people.
Yeah.
The three candidates were John McGlynn to come back, who's got double promotions with Falkirk, Stephen Robinson, who's done well at Motherwell, before that St Mirren, and then Derek McInnes. That's the sort of three obvious candidates. I think that's basically the only candidates, really. And it looks to be Derek McInnes, who, honestly, I think conducted himself pretty appallingly on Sky Sports, basically
touting himself.
And Chris Boyd lavishing all this praise on him, basically saying, aye, forget Kelly, this is your man, Hearts. And Derek McInnes going, oh, thanks, Chris, that's awfully nice of you. So it looks like it's Derek McInnes, who I think is a pretty bog standard manager. He's did okay with Kilmarnock in the last couple of seasons, but it looks like he's going to be the Hearts guy. You make it this sort of has to know the league, local knowledge stuff.
I mean, look, it's none of my business what Hearts do, really. Just as very much an outsider to it, it seems like it's a wasted opportunity. If you're utilising all these top of the range, like cutting edge analytics, and then you come up as you said, like a guy who's just in the road. I fail to see why, because if all you're doing is prioritising a guy who knows the league, then it is such a small pool.
Sound like a bureau office, Derek McInnes.
Yes, you're dealing with 5 managers there that are going to.
Do they apply this to players as well and get players that know the league? So then what's the point in the analytics?
See that, I broadly speaking, I know what they mean by he knows the league, but I would love for someone to explain what they actually specifically mean by that. What about the league do they have to know? Because is it the teams that play in it? Is it the style of football? Because surely that could be picked up by generally any working manager worth its salt in a few months, and that's surely the purpose of the analytics. But anyway, it's Hearts can do what they like. I would be, see this stuff. I mean, Celtic are in a very good position here. We're about to hopefully potentially clinch a treble here. But the reason we're talking about this is because typically Celtic haven't been very good at building from a position of strength and identifying when is the time to refresh things, to revolve the squad, to use a word, or evolve the squad rather. Because we want evolution, not revolution in the squad. So
we want to evolve, not revolve.
Yeah, that's exactly what we want. So the reason we're talking about this is because it is going to be a big summer, because we've had a lot of players who have been there a very long time, and also the way that relates to these various takeovers is that's, generally speaking, that's very healthy for all the clubs who are competing for this league. Like if clubs start getting their act together, it's better for Celtic because it eliminates this whole stuff this season that has been labelled at Celtic the entire time about how that must be boring. All those excuses are eliminated. You start getting probably better at being able to entice players and keep players here, because the guys who are finding fresh motivation because they're being challenged every week, they're being pushed every week, it can only be a good thing for Celtic. So I welcome it all, as much as we'll make fun of all this stuff and have a bit of a laugh at it. Anything that is, and on the surface of things, good for Scottish football can only be good for Celtic as well. As the biggest club, as the most successful club currently in it, then it can only be good. A rising tide lifts all ships and all that, so it can only be good for Celtic.
Yeah, personally, I don't think it takes much a decent manager to come in and win 30 league games in Scotland for if Rangers were to get a manager, and then that means there's a title race. It will come down to, like we've seen last season, Celtic won the league by 8 points and didn't lose a Glasgow derby, so the games were won there. This season it's been a bit different, but with there's sort of, it's all coming together for a bit of chaos for Celtic. With if they get this summer transfer window wrong, along with Brendan Rodgers leaving, once it gets to January, Celtic, do they need to sign a couple of players? We're not going to give the manager money. It can get very murky, like we've seen last time with Brendan Rodgers. So I think this window is key for Celtic. They need to bring in players. We can't be going into another season going, who's our best players? Well, it's Carter Vickers, McGregor, Maeda, the guys that have been here. We need some fresh blood that comes in and sort of becomes new heroes for Celtic. And what we'll look for in that as well is if Brendan Rodgers does leave at the end of that, we need guys that are going to follow on with the next manager. We can't be going in looking at this squad. We've seen it before. History repeats itself, and Celtic have, as we've said over the 10 years of doing this, we're terrible at learning from past mistakes. So we need to get this locked down in the summer, get some players in that are going to come in and make a real difference to Celtic's starting 11 rather than bringing in young players. We've brought in a lot of players sort of early 20s. Maybe it's time to bring in, like Ange did his first season, a couple of more senior players in there and see what we can do from there. But we have to get this right. There has to be players coming in and go straight into that team, not just for the season, but for these qualifiers, man. It's going to be a tough
I don't think this Brendan Rodgers 150. I think you said on the Patreon, Stephen, on the At the Match podcast, patreon.com/20minute-tims. If you've made it this far in the podcast, you must really enjoy it. So if you want some more of it, patreon.com/20minute-tims, where you can get extra videos, podcasts, and writing. But you said, Brendan's run out of numbers. He was 150%. He's 200% going to be there. I don't think that's going to hold water. I don't see a situation where we go into next season with a manager, everyone knowing that the manager's leaving at the end of that season. As Melly said, then you get to January, it becomes way too messy and way too murky. So I think,
especially with the Champions League, if you don't qualify for the Champions League, you don't get money in January. Oh, we can't get the same players and all that. It's
going to be a mess, isn't it? I think the old 12-month rolling contract should rear its head again, and Brendan just gets one signed, and then if he leaves, it's 12-month rolling, and we know he's going to leave at some point, and that's absolutely fine. I think it would feel a bit odd to get this summer's recruitment wrong, because how can you get it wrong 3 times in a row? I think that's the big question. But these are discussions for later on in the season, but Brendan has signalled it already. So he's 1 week before the end of the season, Brendan signals his intent about what he wants to happen in the summer. And I think it's only about time we all sort of turn our focus to it a wee bit, because the season ends next week, the last game of the season. Then we've got the Scottish Cup final. Then the players go on holiday. Then the big work begins for the following seasons, and there's a lot happening.
Scouts come back into Celtic Park after a couple of months off.
Hopefully they've been working hard and working diligently trying to find the football doctor. He's putting his stethoscope on.
Is Pleat still around as well? Remember saying David Pleat?
They've been alive.
Yeah.
Yes, Stephen.
Hopefully, yeah.
He's still alive. And
unless he went in the night.
Well, that's so cruel. On that terrible bombshell, we shall end up. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us. Thank you to people who watch and subscribe on YouTube. You can do that by clicking below, and patreon.com for extra content. We will see you next week.